My daughter looked me dead in the eyes on Christmas Eve and said, "Mom, if you didn't contribute to dinner this year, you don't get a seat at the table." The room went silent. I stood there holding a homemade cranberry loaf with melted snow dripping from my coat, while the smell of roasted turkey filled the house I once helped pay for. My 9-year-old granddaughter tried to run toward me, but my daughter pulled her back. Nobody defended me, not even her husband, so I smiled. I set my dish down on the counter, wished everyone a Merry Christmas, and walked back into the freezing Ohio snow. What my daughter didn't know was that by the end of that Christmas, everything she believed belonged to her was about to disappear. If you've ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for, I want you to stay with me until the end of this story. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Sometimes on nights like this, it helps to know we're not alone. And if stories about family betrayal and healing speak to your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Gina Foster. I'm 68 years old, widowed, and until last Christmas Eve, I still believe that if you loved your child hard enough, deeply enough, sacrificially enough, eventually that love would come back to you. I know better now. I live alone in a small brick house on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. It's quiet here, too quiet sometimes. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones after midnight when the television is off and there's nobody left to ask how your day was. My husband Michael used to fill the house with noise. He had a loud laugh that echoed through every room, and he sang old country songs terribly off-key while fixing things in the garage. Even after 40 years of marriage, hearing his truck pull into the driveway still made me smile. Michael died 12 years ago from a heart attack 2 weeks before Christmas. Some losses never stop echoing. After he died, people kept telling me I was strong. I hated that word. Strong usually meant nobody planned on helping you. So I kept going. I worked part-time bookkeeping jobs even after retirement age. I clipped coupons. I learned how to sleep on one side of the bed. I learned how to sit through holidays pretending my chest didn't ache every time I looked at Michael's empty chair. But the one thing that kept me moving forward was my daughter Rachel. When she was little, Rachel was sunshine in human form. She had messy blonde curls and scraped knees because she was always climbing trees or chasing stray cats around the neighborhood. Every night she'd curl up against me on the couch and say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a giant house and take care of you forever." I believed her. Maybe mothers always do. I raised Rachel to be kind, or at least I thought I did. Michael and I worked ourselves exhausted, making sure she had opportunities we never had. He worked double shifts at the fire department while I handled school bookkeeping during the day and waitressed some nights when money got tight. There were winters when our heating bill was overdue, but Rachel still had ballet lessons. There were birthdays when Michael and I exchanged no gifts because we needed money for Rachel's school trips. And when Rachel got accepted into Ohio State University, I remember sitting in my car crying tears of pride and terror because I had no idea how we were going to afford it. A month later, I quietly sold my grandmother's wedding ring. Rachel never knew. I told her I'd picked up extra hours. That's what mothers do. We turn sacrifice into silence so our children never have to carry the guilt. Things changed slowly after Rachel married Brandon Turner. At first, I ignored the signs because Brandon was charming in that polished, confident way people admire. He always knew exactly what to say in public. He wore expensive watches, talked about investments, and made ordinary things sound important. Michael never trusted him. Too smooth, he whispered to me once after their engagement dinner. A man who spends too much time talking about money usually loves it more than people. I told him he was being unfair. Funny how memory punishes you later. After the wedding, Rachel slowly became harder to reach. Calls got shorter. Visits became conditional. She only really needed me when something went wrong. Could I babysit Sophie? Could I help with groceries just this once? Could I loan them money until Brandon's next business deal came through? Could I help cover daycare? Could I contribute toward their down payment? And every single time I said yes. Because I loved them. Because I remembered being young and scared. Because I thought family was supposed to help each other. The first time Rachel snapped at me, it shocked me so badly, I sat in my car afterward and cried. Sophie had a fever, and I drove 40 minutes through snow to bring soup and medicine. Rachel opened the door while talking on her phone and barely looked at me. "You're late," she muttered. Not "thank you," not "I'm glad you came," just disappointment. I should have noticed then. But love makes fools of mothers, especially lonely mothers. The only person who still treated me like I mattered was my granddaughter Sophie. That little girl loved me with her whole heart. Whenever I visited, she'd grab my hand and drag me into her room to show me drawing stuffed animals or tiny dances she made up herself. Sometimes she'd whisper, "Grandma, you make the best macaroni in the whole world." Children notice love differently than adults do. Adults calculate. Children feel. And maybe that's why what happened on Christmas Eve hurt so much. Because somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped feeling me and started calculating me. About 6 months before Christmas, I started noticing strange conversations whenever I visited Rachel's house. Brandon would lower his voice when I entered the room. Rachel suddenly became curious about my finances. "How much is your house worth now?" "Mom, have you updated your will? You should really think about downsizing." One afternoon, Brandon even joked, "Must be nice sitting on all that equity." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. I laughed it off anyway. I wanted peace more than truth. That was my mistake. The worst part is, they thought I was nearly broke. I let them believe that. They saw my old car, my modest clothes, my quiet life, and assumed I had nothing left. They didn't know Michael had life insurance. They didn't know I invested carefully for years. They didn't know the house Rachel lived in existed because of me. And they certainly didn't know whose name was still legally attached to that property. Sometimes I think people reveal their true character when they believe you have nothing left to offer them. By December, Rachel barely called unless she needed something. Still, when she invited me to Christmas Eve dinner, my heart lifted like a fool's. I spent days preparing. I bought gifts for Sophie. I baked Michael's favorite cranberry loaf recipe. I even wore the red sweater Rachel once gave me years ago when she still hugged me goodbye. I remember standing in front of the mirror that evening, adjusting my earrings and thinking maybe this Christmas would feel normal again. Maybe my family just needed time. Maybe I was imagining the distance. Maybe love could still be repaired. I had no idea I was driving toward the moment that would finally break something inside me. Christmas Eve in Ohio always smells like wood smoke and frozen air. That night, the roads were covered in a thin layer of fresh snow, and the neighborhood lights glowed softly through the darkness like something out of an old holiday movie. As I drove toward Rachel's house, I kept turning down the radio because my thoughts were louder than the music. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter every few minutes, trying to calm the nervous flutter in my chest. I told myself it was excitement. I wanted that evening to matter. I wanted just for one night to feel like a mother again instead of an obligation. Before leaving my house, I must have checked everything 5 times. The gifts for Sophie sat carefully wrapped in silver paper on the passenger seat beside me. One was a watercolor painting set she'd been begging for. The other was a small snow globe with a ballerina inside because she'd recently started dance lessons. For Rachel, I bought a cashmere scarf in her favorite cream color. Even after everything, I still shopped for her like she was my little girl. And then there was the cranberry loaf, Michael's recipe. I had baked it every Christmas for nearly 40 years. The smell alone could bring back entire decades of memories. Flour dust on the kitchen counters. Rachel sneaking dried cranberries from the bowl when she thought I wasn't looking. Michael stealing warm slices before dinner and pretending he hadn't. When my husband died, I stopped making the recipe for almost 3 years because the grief hurt too much. But that Christmas Eve, I made it again, for family. Or at least for what I still hoped my family could become again. Rachel and Brandon lived in a large 2-story colonial house in Dublin, one of the wealthier suburbs outside Columbus. Every time I drove into their neighborhood, I felt like I was entering somebody else's life. The houses were enormous, perfect lawns, expensive SUVs in every driveway, giant wreaths hanging from polished front doors. The kind of neighborhood Brandon loved, showing off online. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed Brandon's black Lexus wasn't parked straight. One tire sat halfway over the curb like he'd rushed home carelessly. That was unusual. Brandon cared about appearances more than anyone I'd ever met. I gathered the gifts, balanced the warm loaf carefully in my arms, and walked toward the house through the falling snow. Before I even rang the bell, I could hear voices inside, not laughter, tension. The door opened suddenly. Rachel stood there wearing an elegant green sweater dress, her blonde hair curled perfectly, makeup flawless. To anyone else, she probably looked beautiful. To me, she looked exhausted. "Oh, "You're here," she said. "Not Mom, not Merry Christmas, just, you're here." Something inside me tightened. I forced a smile anyway. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." She stepped aside stiffly to let me in. The house smelled incredible. Roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, garlic butter, baked ham. Christmas music played softly in the background, but somehow the warmth of the room never reached me. Grandma Sophie came running from the living room in fuzzy red pajamas and nearly crashed into my legs. "There's my girl." I laughed softly, kneeling carefully to hug her. Unlike the adults in that house, Sophie hugged me with her entire body. "I missed you," she whispered. My throat tightened instantly. "I missed you too, baby." Rachel glanced toward the kitchen. "Sophie, don't jump on Grandma. She's holding food." Her tone wasn't cruel exactly, just cold. Too cold for Christmas Eve. I followed Sophie into the living room where several relatives were already gathered. My cousin Linda Harper sat near the fireplace sipping wine. Brandon's younger brother Tyler was scrolling on his phone. A football game played silently on the television while Christmas music fought unsuccessfully against the tension in the room. Linda stood and hugged me quickly. "You look nice, Gina." "Thank you," I said softly. But even Linda seemed uncomfortable. Her smile disappeared almost immediately afterward. That's when I noticed Brandon. He stood near the dining room talking quietly on his phone. The moment he saw me looking, he turned away and lowered his voice further. "No. Tonight's the perfect time," he muttered. Perfect time for what? A strange chill moved through me. When Brandon ended the call, his entire personality shifted instantly. He smiled wide and walked toward me with fake warmth. "Gina, Merry Christmas." He kissed my cheek like a politician greeting voters. "Merry Christmas," I replied carefully. His eyes flicked briefly toward the loaf in my hands. That the famous cranberry bread loaf, I corrected automatically with a faint smile. He laughed too loudly. "Well, Rachel said you still make the best one in Ohio." Rachel didn't respond. She was standing in the kitchen, opening cabinets with sharp, irritated movements. I walked over to place the loaf on the counter and noticed several papers spread near the coffee maker. Bank forms, financial statements, numbers circled in red ink. One page had the words, "Home Equity Application." My eyes froze. Before I could read further, Rachel quickly flipped the papers over. "Mom, can you move your dish over there?" she asked. Her voice was tight. "Of course." I stepped back immediately, embarrassed for even looking. Still, something felt wrong. Very wrong. The evening moved awkwardly after that. Conversation came in short bursts that died quickly. Brandon kept checking his phone. Rachel refilled wine glasses too often. Linda avoided eye contact with me entirely. Only Sophie behaved normally. She sat beside me on the couch, showing me her drawings, while the adults whispered in corners, pretending not to whisper. At one point, Sophie climbed into my lap and asked Grandma, "Are you staying all night?" Before I could answer, Rachel spoke from across the room. "We'll see. We'll see." I blinked at her. Rachel immediately forced a smile. "I mean, depending how late Mom wants to drive home in the snow." But that wasn't what she meant. I could feel it. An hour later, while setting plates on the dining table, I accidentally overheard Brandon and Rachel arguing quietly in the hallway near the laundry room. "This has to happen," Brandon hissed. "She's still my mother," Rachel whispered back. "And we're drowning Rachel." Silence. Then Brandon again. "You said yourself she never helps unless it's convenient." My chest tightened painfully. Never helps. I almost walked into the hallway right then. Instead, I stayed frozen beside the dining table, holding silverware in trembling hands. That's when I noticed another document partially sticking out beneath a folder near the kitchen island. And this time I saw it clearly. My name, Gina Foster. Printed beside financial paperwork. A terrible feeling settled over me. Something was coming. Something planned. And suddenly, the warm Christmas lights around the room no longer looked festive at all. They looked like stage lights before a public execution. Dinner should have felt warm. That's what I remember thinking as I carried the last bowl of mashed potatoes toward the dining table. The table itself looked beautiful. Rachel had decorated it with gold candles, folded linen napkins, tiny evergreen branches, and elegant wine glasses that probably cost more than the dishes Michael and I used for 20 years. Everything looked perfect, except the people sitting around it. Nobody relaxed. Nobody laughed naturally. Even the Christmas music playing softly through the speakers sounded forced somehow, like background noise in a waiting room before bad news. I placed the potatoes beside the turkey and smiled faintly at Sophie. "There we go," I said. "Now it looks like Christmas." Sophie grinned at me from her chair, but Rachel didn't smile back. She stood near the head of the table, clutching a wineglass so tightly I thought it might crack in her hand. Brandon leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her carefully, watching me carefully too. Then Rachel cleared her throat. I actually wanted to say something before we eat. The room went still instantly. Linda lowered her fork. Tyler looked up from his phone, and deep in my chest, something heavy began to sink. Rachel forced a small laugh. Since everyone's here, I tried to smile encouragingly. "What is it, sweetheart?" She avoided my eyes. That's kind of the point. The words hit strangely. Brandon stepped closer behind her like silent support. Rachel inhaled shakily. "You know Brandon and I worked really hard to put this dinner together this year." Nobody answered. "We paid for everything ourselves," she continued. "The food, decorations, gifts. All of it." I nodded slowly, confused. "Well, it's beautiful." "But expensive," Brandon added quickly. Rachel glanced at him before continuing. "And honestly, things have been difficult financially lately. Now my stomach truly tightened. I suddenly understood why those papers were sitting in the kitchen. Money. This was about money. Again, I opened my mouth gently. "Rachel, if you needed help, you could have." "That's not the point, Mom." Her voice sharpened enough to silence me. The room became unbearably still. Rachel set her wineglass down with trembling fingers. "The point is that everyone here contributed something this Christmas." I blinked. Linda looked horrified already, like she knew where this was heading before I did. "Rachel," she whispered softly. But Rachel kept going. Tyler brought wine. Linda paid for desserts. Brandon covered most of the groceries. Then finally, Rachel looked directly at me. "And you just brought bread." "Not bread. The cranberry loaf I had spent all day making with arthritic hands. The recipe her father loved. The recipe she used to beg me to bake every Christmas morning." My throat tightened painfully. "I brought gifts for Sophie, too," I said quietly. Rachel crossed her arms. "That's not really helping with the dinner, though, is it?" I stared at her. At first, I honestly thought she was joking, but nobody laughed. Not Brandon, not Tyler, not even Rachel herself. The humiliation crept over me slowly, like freezing water rising inch by inch. I glanced around the room, waiting for someone to step in. Someone to say, "Rachel, stop." Someone to remind her I was her mother. Nobody did. Brandon finally sighed dramatically and spoke in that fake, calm voice he used whenever he wanted to sound reasonable. "Babe, maybe we shouldn't make this a whole thing." But he wasn't stopping her. He was feeding her courage. Rachel swallowed hard, then said the sentence that shattered something inside me forever. "If you didn't contribute this year, Mom, then maybe you shouldn't really have a seat at the table." Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses against your ears. I could actually hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock behind me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Sophie looked confused. "Mommy?" she asked softly. Rachel kept staring at me, almost defensively now, like she needed me to become angry, so she could justify herself. I looked down at the beautiful Christmas table, at the candles, the turkey, the empty plate waiting for me, then back at my daughter. And suddenly I saw it clearly. This wasn't frustration. This wasn't stress. This was resentment that had been growing for years. Somewhere along the way, Rachel had stopped seeing me as family and started seeing me as value, as usefulness, as contribution. And tonight, in her mind, I had failed some invisible financial test. Linda stood abruptly. "Oh my God, Rachel, that's enough." Rachel immediately snapped back. "No, it's true. Your mother drove here in a snowstorm and brought one loaf of bread." The cruelty of her voice stunned even her. I saw regret flash across her face for half a second. Then Brandon touched her arm gently, and the regret disappeared. Sophie looked between us nervously. "Grandma can have my seat," she whispered. That nearly broke me. Rachel turned sharply toward her daughter. "Sophie, go to your room. But now." Sophie's eyes filled with tears instantly. She looked at me helplessly. I forced myself to smile at her. "It's okay, sweetheart." "No, it's not," she whispered. God help me, that child was the only person in the room with a heart left. As Sophie slowly walked upstairs, crying, I felt something inside me finally go cold. Not rage, not heartbreak, something quieter, something final. Brandon stepped forward, wearing that practiced expression of fake sympathy. Gina, nobody's trying to hurt your feelings here. We're just saying everybody needs to pull their weight. Pull their weight, I almost laughed. Did they know about the years I skipped meals so Rachel could eat better food in college? Did they know I sold jewelry to help pay for her wedding? Did they know I emptied part of my retirement account when Brandon's first business idea collapsed? No, because I never told them. I protected their pride while they slowly destroyed mine. Rachel folded her arms tighter. You've depended on us too sometimes, Mom. I stared at her in disbelief. Depended on them. Watching Sophie twice a week was dependence. Coming to family dinners was dependence. Loneliness suddenly burned hotter than humiliation. I realized then that Rachel truly believed her own version of reality, and Brandon had helped build it. I quietly reached for my coat hanging near the doorway. Rachel's expression flickered. Maybe she expected me to cry. Maybe she expected guilt. Maybe she expected begging. Instead, I picked up the cranberry loaf carefully from the counter and placed it beside the turkey. Then I looked directly at my daughter. I understand, I said softly. Rachel blinked. The calmness unsettled her more than anger would have. Mom, Merry Christmas, Rachel. I turned toward Brandon next. Merry Christmas. For the first time all evening, his confidence slipped slightly, just slightly. Then I looked toward the kitchen island one last time, and there it was again, the paperwork. My name printed across financial documents, refinancing papers, loan information, something involving the house, and suddenly every strange conversation from the past year rearranged itself inside my mind like puzzle pieces locking together. This dinner hadn't just been cruelty, it had been preparation, pressure, a way to make me feel small, weak, indebted, useful. I looked back at Rachel one final time, and in that moment, standing beside the Christmas table where my own daughter had denied me food like I was a burden, I stopped feeling guilty for what I was about to do next. The cold hit me like a slap the second I stepped outside. Snow drifted across the driveway in soft white waves, while Christmas lights blinked cheerfully on neighboring houses, completely unaware that something ugly had just happened behind Rachel's front door. I stood on the porch for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Inside the house, through the frosted windows, I could still see shadows moving around the dining table. My family was about to eat Christmas dinner without me. For one humiliating second, I almost went back inside. Not because I was angry, because I was heartbroken. Because some foolish part of me still wanted Rachel to run after me and say, Mom, wait. I didn't mean it. But the front door never opened. Nobody came. Not Rachel, not Brandon, not even Linda. Only Sophie appeared briefly at the upstairs window, with tears running down her face, before someone pulled her away. That hurt worst of all. I walked carefully down the icy driveway, carrying my empty casserole dish, like a woman leaving church after a funeral. The snow crunched beneath my boots. I remember staring at my own reflection in the dark car window before getting inside. I looked older than I had that morning, smaller somehow. Like humiliation physically shrinks you. For several minutes after starting the engine, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel while the heater slowly warmed the frozen air around me. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Please don't make tonight harder than it already is. I stared at the message in disbelief. Harder for who? For the daughter who publicly humiliated her mother? Or for the mother sitting alone in a freezing car on Christmas Eve because her child decided she no longer deserved food? I didn't answer. Instead, I backed slowly out of the driveway and drove into the falling snow. Ohio roads become strangely lonely during snowstorms. Everything turns muted and distant. Streetlights blur softly through the windshield, and every passing car feels like another life you'll never touch. I drove with no music, only memories. Rachel, at 6 years old, baking cookies with flour all over her face. Rachel crying after her first heartbreak at 16 while I sat awake beside her all night. Rachel walking down the aisle, holding Michael's arm, smiling so brightly I thought my heart would burst. How did that little girl become the woman who told her own mother she hadn't contributed enough to deserve dinner? And more importantly, Why had I allowed it to happen slowly for so many years? By the time I reached my neighborhood, the snow was coming down heavily. My little brick house sat dark and quiet beneath the storm. The front porch light automatically flicked on as I pulled into the driveway, illuminating the wreath hanging crookedly on the door. Michael used to fix it every year because I could never hang it straight. I suddenly missed him so badly I had to stop myself from crying. He would have lost his mind tonight, I whispered aloud while unlocking the front door. The silence inside the house wrapped around me immediately. No Christmas music, no voices, no smell of turkey or cinnamon candles, just stillness. I removed my coat slowly and hung it near the door, then stood motionless in the kitchen staring at the empty table. For the first time all evening, the humiliation fully hit me. My own daughter had denied me a seat at Christmas dinner. Not during an argument, not privately, publicly, deliberately, and everyone else had watched it happen. Something inside my chest cracked open then. I finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears slipping down my face while snow tapped softly against the kitchen windows. After a while, I wiped my face and forced myself to breathe. Michael used to say, "When people show you exactly who they are, Gina believed them the first time." Tonight, Rachel had shown me exactly who she was becoming. And Brandon had shown me exactly what he wanted: money, control, access. Suddenly, those papers on the kitchen island replayed in my mind. My name, financial documents, refinancing paperwork. A terrible suspicion began forming. I walked slowly down the hallway toward Michael's old study. Most of the room remained exactly as he left it 12 years earlier. His reading chair still sat beside the bookshelf. His framed firefighter photo still hung above the desk. And in the closet behind several storage boxes sat the old steel safe. My hands trembled slightly as I knelt beside it. Michael had insisted on keeping important documents protected after retirement. People get strange around money, he always warned. At the time, I thought he worried too much. Now I wondered if he'd understood human nature far better than I ever did. I entered the code carefully. The lock clicked open. Inside were folders, insurance papers, investment records, and property documents neatly organized in Michael's handwriting. I pulled out the folder labeled Dublin Property. My stomach tightened immediately. Years ago, when Rachel and Brandon wanted to buy their house, they didn't qualify for the mortgage amount they needed. Brandon's credit had already taken hits from failed business ventures Rachel barely understood. So Michael and I stepped in, mostly me, after Michael died. I used retirement savings and part of Michael's life insurance to secure the property. But because Claire Bennett, our longtime attorney, didn't trust Brandon financially, she insisted we structure ownership carefully. At the time, Rachel complained it was too complicated. Now, I silently thanked God for Claire Bennett. Because sitting there beneath the dim study lamp on Christmas Eve, I confirmed exactly what Brandon and Rachel apparently forgot. The house wasn't legally theirs, not fully. The primary ownership still belonged to me. I sat back slowly in the chair, stunned by the realization. All evening, Brandon had behaved like a man already entitled to everything, but legally he had far less control than he believed. Then another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, Brandon casually asked whether I had updated my will. At the time, he smiled while asking it. Now the question felt sinister. I continued reading through the paperwork carefully, and then I found something else. A copy of a preliminary refinancing inquiry. Recent. Very recent. My name had been included in financial discussions without anyone speaking to me directly first. I stared at the document while cold anger slowly replaced heartbreak. Not explosive anger. Worse. The kind that becomes clarity. Rachel thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. Brandon thought kindness meant stupidity. And tonight they had pushed too far. My phone buzzed again. This time Brandon. "Hey, Gina. Rachel's emotional tonight. Don't overreact. We'll talk after the holidays." Don't overreact. I actually laughed out loud. That man had just helped humiliate me at Christmas dinner and now wanted to manage my reaction like a business inconvenience. I placed the phone face down on the desk. Then I reached for another folder. Estate planning, trust documents, financial authority. The deeper I looked, the calmer I became. By midnight, I had stopped crying completely. Instead, I made coffee. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the one person Michael trusted almost as much as me. Attorney Claire Bennett answered on the third ring, sounding sleepy but alert. Gina. I looked down at the property papers spread across Michael's desk. Yes, I said quietly. I think we need to protect my assets immediately. Silence. Then Claire's voice sharpened instantly. What happened? I stared out the study window into the falling snow. And for the first time that night, I said the truth out loud. My daughter forgot who paid for her life. Claire Bennett arrived at my house the next morning, wearing snow-covered boots and a long navy wool coat carrying a leather briefcase thick enough to frighten politicians. She had been Michael's attorney for over 25 years, but more importantly, she had been our friend. Claire was one of those women who made people sit straighter without raising her voice. Sharp gray eyes, perfect posture, the kind of calm confidence built from decades of watching ugly family fights unfold inside courtrooms. The moment she stepped into my kitchen and looked at my face, her expression softened. "Oh, Gina," she said quietly. That nearly made me cry again, because unlike Rachel, Claire looked at me like I mattered. I motioned toward the table. "Coffee, please." We sat together while snow drifted outside the windows in thick white silence. My Christmas decorations suddenly looked pathetic in daylight. The tiny tree in the corner, the untouched candy dish, 2 stockings still hanging above the fireplace even though Michael had been gone for years. Claire wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and waited patiently. Finally, I told her everything. Every word Rachel said, every look Brandon gave me. Every humiliating second, standing beside that dinner table, while my own daughter treated me like a beggar, asking for scraps. Claire listened without interrupting once. But when I repeated Rachel's sentence, "If you didn't contribute, you don't get a seat at the table," Claire slowly removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "That girl has lost her mind," she muttered. I looked down at my hands. I keep wondering if maybe I spoiled her too much. Claire gave me a sharp look immediately. "No." The firmness in her voice startled me. "You loved your daughter. That's not a crime." I swallowed hard. "Then how did we end up here?" Claire sighed softly. "Sometimes people confuse constant rescue with entitlement, especially when someone else," she paused meaningfully, "encourages that thinking. Brandon." Even hearing his name in my head made my stomach tighten. Claire opened her briefcase and spread several folders across my kitchen table. "Before we talk emotionally," she said calmly, "we need to talk legally." Something about those words steadied me. Legal facts felt safer than emotions. Claire slid one document toward me. "You were correct last night. The Dublin property remains primarily under your ownership structure." I nodded slowly. Years earlier, after Brandon's second failed investment attempt, Claire had insisted we protect the house carefully. At the time, Rachel accused Claire of being dramatic. Now I realized Claire may have saved me from disaster. The mortgage agreement, Claire explained, was intentionally designed so Brandon couldn't leverage the property recklessly without your approval. I stared at the paperwork. "So they can't refinance without me." Claire's expression hardened. "Not legally." A cold silence settled between us. "Not legally," which meant they had already tried. Claire opened another file, and then my humiliation turned into genuine shock. "Gina," she said carefully, "Rachel and Brandon contacted my office 3 months ago. I looked up instantly. What? They requested information regarding property transfer procedures, long-term care authority, and estate restructuring." I blinked at her. "I don't understand." Claire hesitated. Then she said the sentence that changed something permanently inside me. "They implied they were concerned about your mental sharpness." For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. What?" Claire's eyes filled with sympathy. "They suggested you were becoming forgetful, vulnerable, possibly unable to manage your finances long term." I felt physically ill. "No, I'm sorry." I pushed back from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. I walked toward the sink, gripping the counter so tightly, my knuckles hurt. Forgetful, vulnerable. After everything I had sacrificed for them. They wanted control. Claire said quietly behind me, "At minimum access." I turned slowly. Rachel said that Claire chose her words carefully. Brandon spoke more aggressively. Rachel mostly listened, That somehow hurt worse, because it sounded exactly like my daughter lately. Passive when cruelty happened, silent when it mattered. I stared out the kitchen window while memories flooded back with horrifying clarity. Brandon asking about my investments, Rachel pushing me to simplify my finances, questions about wills, about medical directives, about selling my home. They weren't casual conversations, they were calculations. And all this time I kept mistaking manipulation for concern. Claire continued carefully. I didn't proceed with anything, obviously, but after that meeting, I updated several protective recommendations regarding your estate. I laughed bitterly. You were protecting me from my own family. Yes, she answered softly. I was. That silence afterward felt enormous. Then suddenly another memory hit me. 3 years ago. Rachel crying at my kitchen table because Brandon lost money in some startup investment. I had withdrawn $30,000 from my retirement savings to help them temporarily. Temporary became permanent. Then there was the car loan, the daycare payments, the private school deposit for Sophie, the emergency roof repair. One by one, the memories came crashing down around me like collapsing walls. And each time I helped, Rachel always said, "We'll pay you back." They never did. Not once. I sat back down, slowly exhausted. I think the worst part, I whispered, is that I still would have helped them. Claire looked at me sadly. I know. That was the tragedy of motherhood. Even after being hurt, part of you still wants your child safe. Claire handed me another document. This is more concerning. I looked down. Several late payment notices, loan inquiries, debt restructuring communications, all connected to Brandon. My chest tightened. How bad is it? Worse than Rachel probably knows. Apparently, Brandon's latest business investment had collapsed months earlier. He'd been covering debt using short-term loans and credit lines while pretending everything was stable, and now he was desperate. Suddenly, Christmas Eve made perfect sense. The tension, the financial paperwork, the pressure, the humiliation. They needed something from me, something big. And Brandon likely believed making me feel guilty or dependent would make me easier to control. Claire leaned forward carefully. Gina, I need to ask you something honestly. I nodded. Do you believe Rachel understands the severity of Brandon's financial situation? I thought about my daughter's face the night before, her nervousness, her anger, the way she avoided eye contact, and suddenly I realized something painful. No, I whispered. She doesn't. Rachel knew they were struggling, but she didn't know the full truth. Brandon had likely been feeding her pieces of reality carefully enough to keep control. The realization brought me no comfort, only sadness. Claire closed one folder slowly. You have several options moving forward. I looked at her. You can maintain silence and simply protect your assets quietly. I nodded faintly. Or you can force transparency. I understood exactly what she meant. The room became very still. Finally, I asked the question, burning inside me since Christmas Eve. Do you think Rachel loves me at all anymore? Claire's expression softened deeply then. Yes, she said immediately. But I think she's become dependent on a lifestyle she can't afford, and Brandon has spent years teaching her to measure people by usefulness. Tears burned my eyes again, because that sounded true, and truth hurts differently than lies. Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know what your problem has always been, Gina. I gave a weak smile. Besides terrible judgment, you keep protecting people from consequences. The words hit hard because they were true. All my life, I cleaned up emotional messes before anyone else had to suffer them. Rachel never learned resilience because I cushioned every fall. And now she believed my sacrifices were obligations, not gifts. Claire stood and gathered the papers carefully. I'll freeze any unauthorized property movement immediately. I nodded slowly. And Gina? Yes. For once in your life, she said firmly. Stop worrying about being a good mother long enough to protect yourself. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for nearly an hour staring at the snow outside. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Mom, Sophie keeps asking where you are. Can we please just move past last night? No apology, no accountability, just discomfort management. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to make things easier for my daughter. The day after Christmas felt strangely peaceful. Not happy, not healed, but quiet in the way a storm feels quiet after it destroys something. For the first time in years, I woke up without immediately checking my phone to see whether Rachel needed something from me. No grocery request, no babysitting emergency, no last-minute loan, just silence. And oddly enough, that silence gave me room to think clearly. I made myself breakfast slowly that morning, scrambled eggs, toast coffee, and sat by the kitchen window watching snow melt off the tree branches in my backyard. Usually after family conflict, I rush to fix things. I apologize first, even when I wasn't wrong, especially when I wasn't wrong, because keeping peace always mattered more to me than protecting myself. But this time was different. This time, something inside me had shifted. Rachel had looked at me like I was worthless unless I financially contributed. Brandon had looked at me like I was an obstacle standing between him and money, and now I couldn't unsee it. Around 10 in the morning, Claire called. I froze the refinancing activity she said immediately. I exhaled slowly. So they know. Oh, they know. There was something grimly satisfying in her tone. Apparently, Brandon had already contacted the bank twice that morning, demanding explanations after receiving notice that additional authorization would be required moving forward. Authorization from me. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt a flicker of control return. Claire continued, I also reviewed your estate files last night. We need to make updates immediately. What kind of updates? Protective ones. That word again. Protective. It hurt knowing I needed protection from my own child. We arranged to meet at her office that afternoon. Claire's office sat downtown in one of those old brick buildings with polished wood floors and antique lamps that smelled faintly like paper and coffee. Michael used to joke the place looked like lawyers had been solving rich people's scandals there since the Civil War. Walking in alone this time felt strange, like entering a chapter of my life Michael should have still been part of. Claire greeted me with several thick folders already waiting on the conference table. You ready? She asked gently. No, I admitted. Good. Honest people usually aren't ready for this kind of thing. I sat down slowly. Claire opened the first folder. Let's start with your will. Even hearing those words made my chest tighten. I hated thinking about death. Not for myself, for Sophie. That little girl had become the only soft place left in this entire situation. Claire adjusted her glasses. As it currently stands, Rachel remains primary beneficiary over most assets. I nodded faintly. That had always seemed natural. Rachel was my daughter. Who else would inherit from me? But now the thought filled me with unease. Claire slid another paper toward me. I strongly recommend restructuring portions of your estate into protected trusts. For Sophie, yes. Something loosened in my chest. Yes, I whispered immediately. For Sophie. Unlike the adults around her, Sophie still loved without calculation. I refused to let Brandon ever touch money meant for that child. Claire explained everything carefully. Educational trust protections, restricted access clauses, delayed inheritance structures, independent financial oversight. The language was cold and legal. But beneath it all was one painful truth: I no longer trusted my daughter's judgment. That realization sat heavily inside me. Claire studied me quietly. You still feel guilty? Of course I do. Why I laughed bitterly? Because mothers always do. She didn't argue with that. Instead, she opened another file. This one made my stomach turn immediately. Screenshots, public records, debt filings, business failures. Brandon's financial history spread across paper like an infection. I stared at the numbers. How did Rachel not know about this? Claire gave me a look. Because people like Brandon survive by controlling information. That was exactly right. Brandon always spoke in half-truths and polished optimism. He never technically lied outright. He just carefully edited reality. Claire pointed toward one document. This is especially concerning. A private loan. Large, recent, interest rate horrifying, collateral inquiry pending. I looked up sharply. He's desperate. Yes. And if he loses control financially, Claire's expression darkened. He loses the lifestyle Rachel has become attached to. There it was, the real center of everything. Not love, not family, lifestyle, appearances, the giant house, the luxury vacations, the expensive schools, the image. Suddenly, I remembered Rachel as a teenager, wearing thrift store jeans, without shame, laughing beside Michael while helping him grill hamburgers in the backyard. That girl would have hated this version of herself. My phone buzzed on the table. Rachel calling. Claire raised an eyebrow. I stared at the screen until the ringing stopped. Then another text appeared immediately. Mom, why is the bank suddenly asking questions? A second message followed. Did Claire contact them? No, are you okay? No, I'm sorry. Only panic. Only inconvenience. I set the phone face down again. Claire watched me carefully but said nothing. Then quietly she asked, What do you want now, Gina? The question caught me off guard. Not what should happen legally, not what Brandon deserved. What I wanted. I sat silently for a long time, trying to answer honestly. Finally, I whispered, I want my daughter back. Claire's face softened with sadness. I know. Tears burned behind my eyes again. I don't even recognize her anymore. Claire leaned back thoughtfully. People change slowly, she said. Usually one compromise at a time. I knew she was right. Rachel hadn't become cruel overnight. She became comfortable, entitled, dependent on comfort and image and Brandon's version of success. And every time I rescued her financially, I unknowingly helped build the very arrogance that now hurt me. That realization was devastating. Claire handed me a pen. If we proceed today, several things happen immediately. I nodded slowly. You formally lock property access. Good. You restructure your estate. Necessary. You remove any assumption of automatic financial support. Painful. And Claire added carefully, you create boundaries your daughter cannot financially manipulate. That last part struck deepest. Because the truth was, Rachel had been emotionally manipulating me for years. Not always intentionally, but effectively. Every guilty sigh, every disappointed look, every reminder that family helps family. Meanwhile, I was the only family member expected to bleed endlessly without limit. I signed the first document, then another, then another. Each signature felt strangely heavy, like I was burying the old version of myself piece by piece. By the time we finished, the winter sun was already fading outside Claire's office windows. Claire closed the final folder neatly. It's done. I stared at the stack of signed documents. A strange mix of grief and relief moved through me. Then Claire said quietly, One more thing. I looked up. They're going to react badly. I already knew that. Brandon, especially. Men like him didn't panic quietly. What should I do? I asked. Claire's eyes sharpened. Nothing. What? Don't explain. Don't defend yourself. Don't rush to soothe them. That sounded impossible. Claire seemed to read my face immediately. Gina listened to me carefully. Her voice became firmer. The second you start comforting people for hurting you, they learn they can do it again. That sentence landed somewhere deep inside me, because that had been my entire life. Excusing pain, minimizing disrespect, protecting everyone except myself. When I finally left Claire's office, dusk had settled over downtown Columbus. Christmas decorations still glowed in storefront windows while people hurried along sidewalks carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. The world kept moving normally. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my family had changed in 48 hours. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Brandon, not a text. A voicemail. I hesitated before playing it. His voice came through tense and irritated. Gina. I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop involving lawyers and banks. Rachel's already upset enough after Christmas. Call us back. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he mention humiliating me. Because to Brandon, my feelings had never been the issue, only my usefulness. I deleted the voicemail without responding. Then I drove home through the Ohio winter feeling something unfamiliar growing quietly inside me. Not revenge. Not yet. Self-respect. And after years of neglecting it, self-respect felt almost dangerous. Christmas morning used to be my favorite day of the year. Even after Michael died, I still kept certain traditions alive. I still made cinnamon coffee before sunrise. I still played Nat King Cole Christmas songs while opening the curtains. I still hung stockings even though nobody came to fill them anymore. Hope is stubborn like that. But that Christmas morning felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. The house felt heavier, not because I was alone, because something inside me had finally stopped pretending. I sat in bed for a long time, staring at the pale winter light creeping across the walls. Snow covered the backyard in a perfect, untouched blanket, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel pressured to rush somewhere for someone else. No cooking, no driving across town, no cleaning up after family dinners where I barely felt welcome. Just silence and grief. Not grief for Michael this time, grief for Rachel. I finally understood that I had spent years mourning a daughter who was still alive. My phone sat on the nightstand. No missed calls, no Merry Christmas message, nothing. I told myself not to care. But mothers always care. Around 9 o'clock, I finally forced myself out of bed and walked into the kitchen. I made toast I barely touched and stood by the sink, staring outside while memories replayed endlessly in my head. Rachel at 8 years old, waking me before dawn because she was too excited to wait for presents. Rachel at 14, baking cookies badly while Michael pretended they tasted amazing. Rachel at 22, crying tears of happiness when she got engaged. Where had that girl gone? Or maybe the harder question was, had she always been capable of becoming this person? My phone buzzed suddenly against the counter. I grabbed it too quickly. Rachel. For one foolish second, hope surged through me. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she spent all night regretting what happened. Maybe she finally understood how cruel she had been. I opened the message immediately. Mom, you embarrassed everyone by leaving like that last night. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. Sophie's upset and keeps asking questions. And finally, you could have handled this more maturely. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the audacity stunned me so deeply, I couldn't process it any other way. I embarrassed them. Rachel publicly denied her mother food on Christmas Eve, and somehow my quiet exit was the problem. I set the phone down slowly before anger pushed me into saying something I'd regret. A few minutes later, another text arrived. Brandon this time. We need to discuss the house paperwork issue ASAP. There it was. Not family, not reconciliation. The house. I could almost hear Claire's voice in my head. People reveal themselves when money gets involved, and Brandon was revealing himself completely now. I ignored the messages and carried my coffee into the living room. Michael's old leather chair sat beside the Christmas tree, exactly where it always had. Sometimes, especially during winter mornings, I still caught myself glancing toward it, expecting to see him reading the newspaper. I missed him fiercely that day. Not because he would have fixed everything, but because he would have stood beside me. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes from realizing nobody is protecting you anymore. Around noon, Claire called. Merry Christmas, she said gently. Merry Christmas. You sound stronger today. I looked toward the snow-covered window. I think I'm just tired. Tired can become clarity if you let it. That sounded exactly like Claire, practical even during emotional disasters. She updated me quickly. After the refinancing freeze, Brandon had spent the morning calling the bank repeatedly. Apparently, he became increasingly aggressive each time they refused to proceed without additional authorization from the property owner. Me. Claire's voice sharpened slightly. He's panicking. Good, I thought immediately. Then guilt followed right behind the satisfaction. I hated that part of myself. Even after everything, I still felt guilty, watching consequences finally catch up to people who hurt me. Claire continued. There's something else you need to know. My stomach tightened. What? He tried to imply, you may not fully understand your financial decisions anymore. I went completely still. He said that, yes. The humiliation burned hotter than Christmas Eve itself somehow. Not mentally competent after managing finances responsibly my entire life. After carrying my family through decades of hardship, that man really believed he could quietly erase my authority if it gave him access to my money. He's getting desperate, Claire said carefully, and desperate people become reckless. A cold unease settled inside me. What should I do? Nothing yet. Yet. That word lingered after we ended the call. The rest of the afternoon crawled by, painfully slowly. Christmas movies played quietly on television without me actually watching them. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the street while sledding. Neighbors carried wrapped gifts between houses. Life kept moving. Meanwhile, my family felt fractured beyond recognition. Around 4 o'clock, there was a knock at my front door. For one stupid, hopeful second, I thought Rachel. But when I opened the door, it was Diane Walker from next door holding a foil-covered casserole dish. "Oh, honey," she said immediately after seeing my face. "You spent Christmas alone." That was all it took. I nearly cried right there on the porch. Diane hugged me tightly before walking inside without waiting for permission, exactly the way longtime neighbors do. "I made too much ham casserole," she announced. "And before you lie to me, yes, I absolutely knew you weren't eating properly today." I laughed weakly through tears. Diane sat with me for nearly 2 hours. We drank coffee and talked about everything except Rachel at first. Weather, retirement, her arthritis, old neighborhood gossip. But eventually she looked at me carefully and asked, "What happened?" And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I told someone the entire truth out loud, without minimizing it. Diane's mouth literally fell open. "She said you couldn't eat." I nodded. "Because I didn't contribute enough." Diane looked horrified. "That child has lost her damn mind." I stared down at my coffee quietly. Then Diane said something that stayed with me. "You know, Gina, some people get so used to receiving love that they start treating it like a utility bill. They only notice it when it stops." That sentence settled deep inside me, because that was exactly what Rachel had done. She stopped seeing my love as a gift. It became expected, required, automatic. And maybe that was partly my fault too. I never taught her that love still deserves respect. By evening, my phone had accumulated 6 missed calls from Rachel. 3 from Brandon, multiple texts demanding explanations about the bank issue. Not one genuine apology, not one. Finally, around 8 that night, a voicemail arrived from Rachel. This time, her voice sounded shaky. "Mom, Brandon says the bank froze everything because of you. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me." For the first time, I heard fear underneath her anger, real fear. And suddenly I realized something important. Rachel still didn't know the truth. She had no idea how serious Brandon's financial situation actually was. No idea how much he'd hidden. No idea how aggressively he'd been maneuvering behind the scenes. She still thought this was just another family argument, not the beginning of a collapse. I sat alone in the quiet living room, holding my phone, while Christmas lights blinked softly across the tree. Then another memory surfaced. Michael years ago standing in this exact room saying, "Never interrupt people while they're revealing themselves." I looked down at Rachel's voicemail again. For years, I rushed to save my daughter from discomfort. This time, I stayed silent long enough to let the truth come looking for her instead. 3 days after Christmas, I mailed the package. Not because I enjoyed revenge, not because I wanted to hurt Rachel, but because reality was coming, whether she was ready or not, and I refused to let Brandon drag me quietly into financial ruin while pretending to be family. The box itself looked harmless. Simple brown paper, no decorations, no dramatic notes written outside. Inside, though, sat the truth they had spent years ignoring. I placed everything carefully before sealing it. Copies of the property ownership documents, legal notices, freezing unauthorized refinancing activity, updated estate protection filings, and finally a handwritten letter from me to Rachel. That letter took me almost 6 hours to write, because anger is easy, honesty is harder. I rewrote it again and again, trying not to sound cruel while also refusing to sound weak. In the end, I stopped trying to protect Rachel's feelings from her own actions. I drove the package personally to the post office that morning, while snow flurries drifted through the freezing Ohio air. The young clerk smiled politely while weighing the box. "Anything fragile?" he asked. I almost laughed. Yes, I thought, a family. But instead, I simply shook my head. By the time I returned home, I felt strangely calm, not happy, but steady. like a woman finally standing upright after years of bending herself into smaller shapes for everyone else's comfort. The package arrived at Rachel's house the next afternoon. I know because Rachel called me 16 times within the first hour. I didn't answer. Then Brandon started calling too. I ignored him as well. Eventually, Rachel left a voicemail, her voice trembling with confusion and anger. Mom, what is this? Why are lawyers involved? Why did we get legal notices? I'm sorry. Still no apology, only panic. That evening, I sat quietly in my living room with a cup of tea while my phone buzzed endlessly beside me like a trapped insect. Then finally, another voicemail came through. This time, Rachel sounded different, smaller somehow. Mom, Brandon said the house paperwork is just temporary confusion, but Claire won't answer us without your permission. Please call me. I closed my eyes. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I heard genuine fear in my daughter's voice. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing stability. And that realization hurt more than I expected. I finally listened to Brandon's voicemail after that. Big mistake. Gina, he snapped sharply. No fake politeness left anymore. You're overstepping. Rachel's extremely upset. Sophie's confused, and this legal nonsense needs to stop immediately. You're making emotional decisions. Emotional decisions. Interesting choice of words from a man secretly drowning in debt while trying to manipulate ownership of property he didn't legally control. I deleted the voicemail halfway through. Then I sat silently in the dim glow of the Christmas tree lights, remembering every time Brandon ever made me feel small. Tiny moments I ignored for years suddenly looked enormous. The comments about my simple little house, the jokes about retirement, the constant pressure to spend more, contribute more, help more, and always with Rachel standing nearby, so slowly absorbing his worldview, like poison dripping one drop at a time. That night, around 7, Claire called. They opened the package. I sighed softly. I figured. Rachel apparently had no idea the ownership structure remained primarily under your name. That didn't surprise me. Rachel signed papers for years without reading carefully because Brandon always handled financial stuff, another thing Michael warned her not to do. Claire continued carefully, but Brandon knew. I went still. What? He absolutely knew, Gina. Cold silence settled around me. Of course he knew. That explained his panic. Rachel may have been naive, Brandon was not. He was probably hoping Claire said that once refinancing moved far enough along, emotional pressure would force your cooperation. I stared at the snow outside my living room window. Christmas decorations still glowed faintly across the neighborhood, but mine suddenly felt tired now, like decorations after a party nobody enjoyed. He humiliated me to weaken me, I whispered. Claire didn't answer immediately, because she knew it was true. I thought back to Christmas Eve again. The public embarrassment, the contribution speech, the calculated pressure in front of family. Brandon wanted me emotional guilty, eager to earn my place back. Instead, he accidentally reminded me I still had power. Claire spoke again carefully. There's another issue. What now? Rachel requested a meeting. My chest tightened instantly. With me, with both of us. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. And Brandon. He insists on attending. Of course he did. Control. Always control. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me desperately wanted to see Rachel. Even now. Even after everything. That's the humiliating truth nobody tells you about motherhood. Your heart keeps reaching for people who hurt it. But another part of me finally understood something important. Rachel couldn't keep avoiding consequences simply because I loved her. I'll think about it, I said quietly. After we hung up, I walked slowly into the kitchen and reread the copy of the letter I'd sent Rachel. The final paragraph still hurt most. You said I didn't contribute enough to deserve a seat at your table, so perhaps it's time you fully understand everything I contributed long before this Christmas. I remembered crying while writing those words, not from anger, from disappointment, because all I ever truly wanted was gratitude, not worship, not repayment, just basic human gratitude. Later that evening, Diane Walker stopped by again, carrying homemade soup and neighborhood gossip the way some people carry medicine. You hear about the Turners? She asked casually, while setting containers on my counter. I stiffened immediately. What about them? Apparently, Brandon's been acting like a man on fire at the bank downtown. I blinked. Diane lowered her voice dramatically. My cousin works there. Says he nearly got escorted out yesterday. A small, guilty satisfaction flickered inside me. Then immediately came sadness. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was collapse. And somewhere in the middle of it sat my daughter, still not fully understanding how badly her husband had lied to her. Diane watched my face carefully. You still love her. It wasn't a question. I nodded silently. Then don't confuse love with rescue, Diane said softly. That sentence followed me long after she left. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I wandered into Michael's old study again. I sat in his chair, surrounded by documents, trust papers, and legal files, while snow drifted softly beyond the windows. Then my phone buzzed one final time, a text from Rachel. Mom, please tell me Brandon's lying. Please tell me we're not about to lose this house. I stared at the screen for a very long time, because suddenly, for the first time since Christmas Eve, Rachel sounded less like Brandon's partner, and more like my frightened little girl again. I didn't answer Rachel's text that night, not because I wanted to punish her, because for the first time in years I understood that rushing to soothe her immediately would only delay the truth she desperately needed to face. Still, I barely slept. I kept picturing her sitting somewhere in that oversized house, staring at legal paperwork while Brandon scrambled to explain things away. And deep down, despite everything, I hated knowing she was scared. That's the terrible thing about being a mother. Even when your child breaks your heart, part of you still wants to wrap them in blankets and promise everything will be okay. But some lessons only arrive through consequences. The next morning, my phone exploded before I'd even poured coffee. Linda Harper. I answered reluctantly. Well, she said immediately, the family's officially at war. I closed my eyes. What happened now? Rachel called, half the relatives crying. Of course she did. Linda sighed heavily. She's telling everyone you're threatening to take her house away because of one argument. One argument. Amazing how quickly cruelty gets rewritten once consequences appear. And Brandon, I asked quietly. Linda snorted. Oh, he's furious. Apparently he's calling this financial abuse. I nearly dropped the phone. Financial abuse. After years of draining money from me. The irony was almost laughable. Linda's voice softened slightly. Gina, I need you to know something. What most of the family didn't realize how much you've done for Rachel over the years. That didn't surprise me either. I never advertised my sacrifices. I paid quietly, helped quietly, struggled quietly. Meanwhile, Brandon and Rachel enjoyed the appearance of independence while standing on foundations I built for them. Linda continued carefully. Claire sent over documentation. I frowned. What documentation? Proof. Loans. Payments. Tuition. House records. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Claire had moved faster than I expected. Apparently, after Rachel began portraying herself as a victim, Claire decided facts needed to enter the conversation. And facts are stubborn things. Linda lowered her voice. You should have heard the silence after people realized you basically financed half their adult lives. A bitter ache moved through me. I never wanted public credit, but it still hurt realizing how invisible my sacrifices had become. Rachel sounded shocked, Linda admitted. She doesn't know everything, I whispered. No, Linda agreed softly. I don't think she does. After we hung up, I sat staring at my untouched coffee while snow melted slowly against the windows. The strange thing about truth coming out is that it never arrives cleanly. It drags embarrassment behind it. Shame, secrets, family fractures. And now everyone was finally seeing what I spent years hiding. Around noon, Claire called again. You're becoming popular, she said dryly. That bad, Rachel requested another meeting. Brandon, too. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. What do they want? Mostly damage control, I suspect. That sounded accurate. Claire paused. There's something else you need to hear before deciding. My stomach tightened instantly. What? Someone from Brandon's side of the family contacted me privately this morning. I straightened immediately. Who? His older cousin, Mark Turner. I vaguely remembered Mark. Quiet man. Divorced. Worked in commercial insurance somewhere outside Cincinnati. What did he say? Claire's voice lowered carefully. He warned me Brandon's financial situation may be much worse than we initially believed. Cold dread slid through me. How much worse? There are rumors of gambling debts. I froze. No. He apparently started with risky sports betting several years ago after business losses. Suddenly, dozens of strange memories rearranged themselves inside my mind. The mood swings, the unexplained cash emergencies, the constant investment opportunities, the pressure for quick money. Oh, God, Rachel really didn't know. Claire continued grimly. There may also be personal loans Rachel never signed off on knowingly. My chest tightened painfully. That man had been building a financial fire underneath my daughter's life while smiling across holiday dinners. And somehow Rachel still defended him. Or maybe she defended the version of him she desperately wanted to believe existed. By afternoon, the situation exploded even further. Tyler Brandon's younger brother unexpectedly called me. We had never been particularly close, so hearing his nervous voice immediately made me suspicious. "Mrs. Foster," he said awkwardly, "I just wanted to say, what happened at Christmas was messed up." I stayed quiet. Then Tyler sighed heavily. Brandon's out of control right now. There it was again. Not surprised, not confused, out of control. "How long have you known?" I asked softly. Silence. Too long. Finally, Tyler admitted long enough. Anger flared through me for the first time in days. "You watched him manipulate my daughter." "He manipulated everybody," Tyler said quietly. That stopped me. Apparently, Brandon borrowed money from multiple relatives over the years while hiding debt from Rachel. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always temporary, always another deal about to succeed. And suddenly, I realized something horrifying. Christmas Eve wasn't random cruelty. It was desperation reaching its final stage. Brandon needed access to equity fast, which meant he needed control over me. And Rachel, whether intentionally or not, helped pressure me publicly. After the call, I walked through my silent house feeling exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Every room carried memories of Rachel growing up. Her height marks still faintly penciled inside the pantry doorway. Old Christmas ornaments she made in elementary school, photographs from birthdays, graduations, vacations, an entire life built around loving one person. And now that same person sat in another house, wondering whether I would destroy her stability. The painful truth, I still didn't want Rachel destroyed. I wanted her awake. There's a difference. Around 5 that evening, my front doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, my breath caught. Sophie. My granddaughter stood on the porch, bundled in a pink winter coat, holding a small stuffed penguin, and behind her stood Rachel. For a second, none of us spoke. Rachel looked terrible. Dark circles beneath her eyes, mascara smudged slightly, her carefully controlled appearance finally cracking under stress. Sophie immediately ran toward me. "Grandma." I dropped to my knees and hugged her tightly. And just like that, my heart broke all over again, because none of this was her fault. Rachel stood frozen near the doorway, looking ashamed for the first time since Christmas Eve. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded small. I slowly stood, but didn't invite them inside immediately. Not out of cruelty, out of caution. Rachel noticed, and I saw the realization hit her. For the first time in her life, she no longer had automatic access to me. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Before I answered, Sophie tugged my sleeve. "Mommy cries at night now," she whispered sadly. Rachel closed her eyes in humiliation. I felt my anger weaken instantly. That's the danger of loving your children too much. Their pain still reaches you even when they caused your own. I finally stepped aside. "Come in." Rachel walked slowly into the house, looking around like she suddenly noticed everything differently. The modest furniture, the old hardwood floors, the tiny kitchen, the life I quietly maintained while funding hers. Sophie curled up immediately on the couch beside the Christmas tree while Rachel stood awkwardly near the fireplace. Then finally she whispered the words I'd been waiting days to hear. "Mom, did you really pay for our house?" I looked at her carefully. "No, Rachel," I said softly. "I paid for your future. There's a difference." And judging by the devastated expression on her face, I think she finally understood that for the first time. Rachel stood in my living room like she didn't quite belong there anymore. It was strange seeing my own daughter like that, hesitant, uncertain, almost afraid to take up space in a house she had visited her entire life. Sophie sat quietly on the couch, hugging her stuffed penguin, watching both of us with worried eyes. The Christmas tree lights still blinked softly in the corner, completely unaware that everything in this room had already changed. Rachel finally spoke again, her voice fragile. "Mom, I didn't know about the house. Brandon told me it was mostly ours." I studied her face carefully. There it was, confusion, shock, and something worse, realization creeping in slowly, like she was beginning to understand she had been standing on unstable ground for years without noticing. "I never took it from you," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting other people take it from me." Rachel flinched at that, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She stepped closer, then stopped halfway between me and the couch. "I didn't mean for Christmas Eve to happen like that," she whispered. I didn't answer immediately, because I needed to be honest with myself first. Did she mean to humiliate me, or did she just not care enough to stop it? Those were very different things. I think I said slowly, "You meant to make a point. I just don't think you expected me to walk away from it." Her eyes flickered with guilt. Behind her, Sophie quietly asked, "Grandma, are you mad at Mommy?" That question hit harder than anything Rachel had said. I walked over and sat beside Sophie, gently brushing her hair back. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm not mad at Mommy. I'm just disappointed in what's been happening." Rachel looked down immediately at that word. Disappointed. I used to hear that word from her teachers when she was a teenager. Never from me. At least not like this. Brandon wasn't with her. I noticed that immediately. No shadow behind her. No controlling presence. Just Rachel. For the first time in years. "I told him I needed space," she said quietly, as if answering my thoughts. That surprised me. A small shift. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to matter. I nodded slowly. "That's a start." Rachel let out a shaky breath and sat down across from me. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The house felt too quiet again, but this time it wasn't the same silence as Christmas Eve. This silence was different. It was fragile. "I didn't know about the debts," Rachel said finally. "Not all of it. I knew things were tight, but he always said it would get better after the next deal." I felt a dull ache in my chest. "Rachel," I said gently, "how many next deals have there been?" She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "I thought I was helping my family," she added quickly. "I thought I was doing what you always did for me." That line hurt more than I expected, because it revealed something I hadn't fully considered before. Rachel didn't just learn entitlement from Brandon. She learned dependency from me. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but still. "I taught you to trust the people you love," I said softly. "I didn't teach you to give them everything without question." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know where the line was," she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I didn't see just the woman who hurt me. I saw the child I raised. Lost, confused, pulled in two directions, one by me, one by Brandon. "I know," I said quietly. That surprised her. She blinked at me. "You know." "I know what it feels like to believe someone who speaks confidently enough," I said. "And I know what it feels like to ignore your instincts because you want peace more than truth." Her shoulders shook slightly. Behind her, Sophie climbed off the couch and walked over to sit between us. "I don't like when everyone is sad," she said softly. That simple sentence broke something in the room. Rachel reached out and gently held Sophie's hand. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. Then Rachel looked back at me. "Mom, what do we do now?" It wasn't a demand. It wasn't defensive. It was a real question, for the first time. And I realized something important in that moment. This was no longer about punishment. It was about survival. First, I said carefully, "You need to understand everything fully. Not Brandon's version, not your assumptions. The full truth." Rachel nodded slowly. "I'm scared to hear it," she admitted. "That's understandable." I stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a folder Claire had prepared for me. I placed it on the table. "This is everything I've paid for over the years," I said calmly. Rachel stared at it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I didn't want you to find out like this, I added. She opened it slowly. Page after page, mortgage assistance, tuition payments, medical bills, emergency transfers, car loans. Her face changed as she read. First confusion, then disbelief, then shock. Then something that looked like grief. I had no idea, she whispered. I know, I said quietly. But you still assumed I contributed nothing. That sentence hung in the air. Rachel didn't defend herself. She couldn't, because it was true. She closed the folder slowly. I didn't recognize what I was doing, she said. That's the dangerous part, I replied gently. You don't always need bad intentions to hurt someone. Silence again, this time heavier. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly. What about the house? I sighed. The house was always under my protection legally. Not to control you, to protect the investment I made for your stability. Her voice cracked. So we could lose it if nothing changes with Brandon's finances? Yes. Rachel looked like the ground had shifted beneath her. I didn't know it was this bad. I believe you, I said. That surprised her again. Because I wasn't attacking her anymore, but I wasn't rescuing her either. And that balance was new for both of us. Rachel leaned forward, burying her face in her hands. I feel like I've been living inside something I don't understand. Sophie leaned into her side quietly. I watched them both. 2 generations. One still forming her understanding of love. One finally questioning everything she thought she knew. I can't fix this for you, I said gently. Rachel looked up quickly. But I can't do it alone. You're not alone, I said. A pause. But I'm not stepping into the middle of it anymore either. That was the boundary, the one Claire told me to hold. Rachel nodded slowly, even though I could see she didn't fully understand what that meant yet. I need to talk to Claire, she said. I already told her you might. Rachel gave a faint, tired laugh. Of course you did. Then she hesitated. Mom, did you really think I didn't love you anymore? That question stayed between us longer than anything else. I chose my words carefully. I think I said slowly, you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource. And I think you let someone else teach you how to do that. Her eyes filled again. I didn't want to. I know. That was the truth I kept returning to. Rachel wasn't evil, but she had been careless with something sacred, and carelessness has consequences too. Brandon's absence suddenly made more sense now. He wasn't here because this conversation wasn't about control. It was about truth, and he didn't survive in truth. As the afternoon light faded outside, Sophie fell asleep on the couch between us. Rachel watched her for a long moment, then quietly said, I don't know who I am without him. I looked at her steadily. Then that's where you start. Her breath trembled. I don't want to lose everything. You won't lose everything, I said softly, but you might lose illusions. And that I realized was the real beginning of her reckoning. Not the house, not the money, but the story she had been living inside. The days after Rachel's visit did not bring peace. They brought noise, not in my house, but in my phone, my mailbox, and my memory. Brandon called repeatedly, sometimes from different numbers, sometimes leaving voicemails that shifted between anger, confusion, and thinly veiled threats. At first I listened to them, then I stopped. Because I realized something important. Every message from Brandon followed the same pattern: pressure, blame, urgency. Never accountability. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't call as much. But when she did, her voice was different each time. Unstable, uncertain, like someone standing on shifting ground trying to figure out which direction was safe. One evening she called while I was washing dishes. Mom. Brandon moved out, she said quietly. My hand stopped mid-motion. When? 2 days ago. I leaned against the counter, unsure what I felt, first relief or concern. What happened? I asked. A long pause followed. He said I betrayed him, she whispered, that I ruined everything by involving lawyers and freezing accounts. There it was again. Blame, always outward, never inward. And what do you think? I asked gently. Rachel hesitated. I think... Her voice cracked slightly. I think I don't know what I'm supposed to think anymore. That answer told me more than anything else. Confusion meant she was finally seeing the cracks. but confusion alone wasn't enough. "I'm scared, Mom," she admitted. That word scared landed heavily in my chest, because I remembered saying it myself many years ago when Michael died. "I know," I said softly. Sophie could be heard in the background asking for juice. Normal life still existed in fragments, even inside chaos. After the call ended, I sat alone in my living room for a long time. The Christmas tree was still up, though most of the neighborhood had already taken theirs down. Its lights blinked gently, indifferent to human collapse. Then Claire called. "I met with a financial investigator today," she said, without greeting. That immediately pulled me upright. "And there's more than debt," she replied carefully. "Brandon has been moving money between accounts under different names for years." My stomach tightened. "Illegal," potentially, Claire said. "At minimum, highly irregular." I closed my eyes. So it wasn't just poor decisions. It was concealment. Systematic concealment. Claire continued, "If this escalates, Rachel could be exposed to liability without even knowing it." My chest tightened. "No," I said quickly. She didn't know. "I believe you," Claire replied. "But courts don't always separate intent from association." That was the part that terrified me. Rachel wasn't just emotionally entangled. She could be legally entangled too. After I hung up, I stared at the quiet house around me. Everything I had built over a lifetime suddenly felt like a battlefield I never asked for. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I kept thinking about Rachel's face when she sat in my living room, not the entitled version from Christmas Eve, but the broken version from after Brandon left. There was a difference, a painful one. Entitlement was dangerous, but collapse could become awakening. 2 days later, Rachel arrived unannounced. This time she didn't ring the doorbell. She just stood on the porch, holding Sophie's hand, looking like she hadn't slept properly in days. When I opened the door, Sophie immediately ran inside. Rachel stayed behind. "I talked to Claire," she said quietly. I nodded, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. Another pause. Then Rachel added, "I didn't realize how deep it went." I stepped aside, letting her in. Inside, she moved slowly through the living room like she was seeing it differently for the first time. Not as a backdrop for childhood memories, but as something I had maintained alone. "I didn't know you were carrying all of this," she said. I didn't respond immediately, because I wasn't sure what she meant. Financially, emotionally, or both. "I thought you were fine," she added softly. That sentence hit harder than I expected. "I was never just fine," I said quietly. "I just didn't make it your problem." Rachel sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. "I think I made everything my problem except the right ones," she admitted. There it was. Self-awareness. Fragile, new, unstable, but real. From the kitchen, I could hear Sophie singing softly to herself while playing with toys. Rachel followed my gaze. "She misses him," she said. "I know." Silence stretched between us again. Then Rachel finally asked the question I knew was coming. "What happens now?" I sat down across from her. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what you're willing to face." She nodded slowly. "I don't want him back," she said immediately. I can't." That surprised me, not because I thought she should forgive him, but because I expected hesitation. Instead, there was certainty, painful certainty. "I think I've been trying to fix something that was never stable," she continued. "I kept thinking, if I just did enough, it would all make sense again." I looked at her quietly. And now? I think I was wrong. That was the first clean truth I had heard from her since Christmas Eve. Rachel looked down at her hands. "I keep thinking about what you said," she whispered. "About seeing you as a resource instead of a person." I didn't interrupt, because this part mattered. "I don't like who I was becoming," she admitted. Her voice cracked. "And I really don't like how easy it was for me to justify it. That honesty hurt her. I could see it. But it also began to change something in the room. I'm not asking you to fix this for me," she added quickly. "I know I can't come back and undo what happened. That was important, because for the first time, she wasn't asking me to rescue her. She hesitated. "I don't know how to start over." I exhaled slowly. That question was more real than anything else she had ever said to me. "You start. I said gently, by accepting that your life won't look the same as it did before. Her eyes filled with tears. And Brandon. That's his path now, I said firmly, not yours. A long silence followed. Then Sophie ran into the room holding a drawing. Grandma, look. It was a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands. Me, Rachel, Sophie, no Brandon. Rachel stared at it, then slowly broke down crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of crying that comes when denial finally stops protecting you. I don't want her to lose her dad, she whispered. I know, I said softly, but you also can't keep losing yourself. That was the real balance, the hardest one. That evening, Rachel didn't leave right away. She stayed for dinner, simple food, nothing elaborate, no performance, no pressure, just quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, the table didn't feel like a battlefield. But it didn't feel healed either. It felt like something fragile was being rebuilt from ashes. After Sophie fell asleep on the couch, Rachel looked at me again. Mom, I'm sorry, she said finally. I nodded slowly. I know. And for now, that was enough. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but the first honest step back towards something that might someday resemble family again. The first week after Rachel started coming around again felt unstable, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, uncomfortable way that made every interaction feel like it was being carefully rebuilt brick by brick. She didn't move back in. She didn't ask for forgiveness in grand speeches. She just started showing up, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes alone, sometimes just to sit in silence while I made coffee as if she was trying to relearn how to exist in the same space without tension. But healing doesn't move in straight lines, and neither does guilt. One afternoon, I noticed Rachel standing in my kitchen staring at the old family calendar on the wall, the one Michael used to mark in red ink. Doctor appointments, school events, bills due, life organized into manageable pieces. You still keep this? She asked softly. Yes, I said. She smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. I used to think you were just organized, she said. I raised an eyebrow. And now? She hesitated. Now I think you were holding everything together. That silence between us carried more meaning than any apology so far. Sophie was outside in the yard that day, collecting fallen branches and pretending they were magic wands. Children recover faster than adults. They don't stay trapped in narratives the same way. Rachel watched her through the window. She asks about him, Rachel said quietly. I already knew who she meant. Brandon. Does she miss him? I asked. Rachel shook her head slowly. No, she says he was always busy. That alone told me everything. Even a child understands presence better than promises. Rachel exhaled shakily. He tried to call again, she added. My expression tightened slightly. Did you answer no? A pause. Then she added, I don't think I can keep going back and forth anymore. That was new. Finality. Or the beginning of it. I studied her carefully. And what do you want now? Rachel looked down at her hands. I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning and pretending it's normal, she said honestly. That was the first time she had described her life without defending it. Later that evening, Claire called again. Her tone was more serious than before. We need to talk, she said immediately. I felt my stomach tighten. Is it about Brandon? Yes. I sat down slowly. What happened? A pause. He filed a claim. My chest tightened. A claim for what? Claire's voice became precise. He's attempting to argue shared financial liability over certain assets acquired during the marriage. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Is it legitimate? Partially, she admitted. But there's a complication. I waited. Rachel's name is attached to several financial instruments Brandon used during his borrowing period. My breath caught. She didn't know, I said immediately. I believe that, Claire replied, but legal systems don't always separate knowledge from association quickly enough. Silence filled the line. So what does this mean? I asked quietly. It means Claire said carefully that this could escalate into a formal financial investigation involving both of them. I stared out the window at the fading daylight. Even Rachel, yes. The word hit like a stone. That night, I couldn't sit still. I walked through the house, repeatedly stopping in rooms without remembering why I entered them. Michael's study felt heavier than usual, like the walls were remembering everything I was trying not to think about. Around midnight, Rachel called me. Her voice was different, strained. Mom, Claire just contacted me. I closed my eyes. I know. Is it bad? A long pause. Yes, I said honestly. There was silence on her end. Then her voice cracked. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, I repeated gently. But you were connected to someone who did. That distinction mattered, but it didn't make it easier. I feel like my life is collapsing, she whispered. I leaned against the counter. I know what that feels like, I said quietly. That was something she didn't fully understand yet. Not all collapse is loud. Some of it happens slowly over years, while you're still smiling in family photos. Rachel took a shaky breath. I don't want Sophie to go through this. That was the first time she mentioned Sophie instead of herself. A shift. Subtle, but important. You can protect her from a lot of this, I said carefully. How? By telling the truth early, before someone else defines it for her. Another long silence. Then Rachel said something I didn't expect. I think I stayed with Brandon longer than I should have because I didn't know how to be alone again. That honesty hit deeper than anything so far because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about manipulation. It was fear. Fear of starting over. Fear of failure. Fear of being nothing without the structure she had chosen. I understand that, I said softly. But understanding didn't mean acceptance. Not anymore. The next day, Rachel came to my house alone. No Sophie, no Brandon, just her. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you've stopped pretending. I met with Claire, she said immediately. I nodded. She explained everything. Another pause. Then Rachel sat down heavily on the couch. I didn't realize how much trouble I was in, she admitted. Are you in trouble? I corrected gently. Or are you connected to trouble? That distinction mattered. She looked up at me. I don't know anymore, she whispered. For the first time, she didn't try to defend Brandon. That silence was new. I keep thinking about Christmas Eve, she said suddenly. My chest tightened slightly. I shouldn't have said what I said, she added quickly. I waited. I thought I was being responsible, she said. But I was just repeating things he used to say. There it was. Clarity. Slow. Painful. Incomplete. But real. I sat across from her. You don't have to become him to survive him, I said quietly. That landed heavily. Rachel closed her eyes. I don't want him in my life anymore, she said finally. That was the first clean break she had made. No hesitation, no ambiguity, just truth. But truth doesn't automatically fix consequences. I know, I said softly. A pause. Then she looked at me again. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm a bad daughter? That question hung in the air between us like something fragile. I studied her carefully. No, I said finally. Relief flickered across her face for a second. But I wasn't finished. But you hurt me, I added gently. And that matters too. Her expression crumpled slightly. I don't know how to fix that. I leaned forward. You start by not asking me to erase it. That truth settled between us. Not harsh, not soft, just real. Outside snow began falling again. Slow, quiet, steady. Sophie would return soon from a friend's house. Life would continue. But something had shifted now. Not fully repaired, not fully broken, but no longer frozen in place. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever it was, we were finally facing it instead of pretending it didn't exist. The first time I saw Brandon again, it was not planned. It never is with people like him. He showed up at my house on a gray afternoon when the sky looked like it couldn't decide whether to snow or simply give up. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the knock. 3 sharp hits. Not polite, not hesitant. Controlled. I already knew before I opened the door. Brandon Turner stood on my porch in an expensive coat that looked out of place in my quiet neighborhood. His hair was slightly disheveled, but his expression was still carefully managed, like a man trying to look calm while standing near a fire he started himself. "Gina," he said. No greeting, no apology, just my name, like a warning. I didn't move aside. "Rachel isn't here," I said. "I didn't come to see Rachel." That surprised me. For a second. Then I stepped back slowly and let him in. He walked into my living room like he still belonged there. That bothered me more than I expected. "I'll make this quick," he said. I stayed standing. "I'm listening." Brandon exhaled sharply and looked around the room as if evaluating something. Then his eyes landed on the Christmas tree in the corner, still not fully taken down. "I need you to stop this legal interference," he said finally. There it was. Not discussion. Not negotiation. Control disguised as urgency. "I'm not interfering," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting what is legally mine." He scoffed. "Rachel is falling apart because of this." That sentence made something in me tighten. "Rachel is falling apart," I said slowly, "because she just learned her entire financial stability was built on lies she didn't fully understand." His jaw tightened. "You've turned her against me." I almost laughed. "No, Brandon. You did that yourself." That finally cracked something in his expression. Not guilt, not shame, anger, controlled but real. "You don't understand how complicated things are," he said. "I understand more than you think," I replied quietly. A long silence stretched between us. Then he changed tactics. "That's what manipulators do when pressure fails." His voice softened. "Gina, I know you love Rachel. I know you want what's best for her." There it was, the pivot, from aggression to sympathy. "I do," I said carefully. "Then don't destroy her life over paperwork." I studied him. For the first time, I didn't feel intimidated by him, just tired. "No, Brandon," I said quietly. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm exposing what you already built." His expression hardened again. "You think you're innocent in this?" That caught me off guard. "Excuse me." "You enabled her," he said sharply. "You spoiled her with financial support. You made her dependent on you, and now you're acting shocked when she doesn't function without it." Something cold moved through my chest. Not because it was true, but because it was partially rooted in a distorted version of truth. That's what made it dangerous. "I supported my daughter," I said firmly. "There's a difference." "Not to her," he snapped. That sentence lingered in the air longer than anything else, because it revealed something important. Rachel's perception had been shaped by both of us. Me through love, him through manipulation. And somewhere in between, she had lost clarity. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Rachel walked in holding Sophie's hand. She froze immediately when she saw him. The room changed instantly. Sophie instinctively moved closer to me. Rachel's face went pale. "Brandon," she said quietly. He turned toward her quickly. "Rachel, we need to talk." "No," she said immediately. That was new. A clean refusal. "No," he repeated like he didn't understand the concept. Rachel stepped forward, slowly positioning herself between him and Sophie. "I said no." Something in Brandon's expression flickered. Control slipping. "That's not how this works," he said more sharply. Rachel's voice shook slightly, but she didn't step back. "It is now." Silence. Heavy. Then Brandon looked at me again. "You've poisoned her," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No. She's finally seeing clearly." Rachel turned toward me briefly, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Resolve. "I met with Claire again," Rachel said suddenly. Brandon's attention snapped back to her. She told me everything. Rachel continued. I watched him carefully. That was the moment everything changed. Brandon realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. Rachel wasn't confused anymore. She was informed, and that made him dangerous in a different way. "What exactly did she tell you?" he asked cautiously. Rachel's voice was steady now. "Everything I signed without reading properly. Everything you said was temporary. Everything you said would fix itself later." His silence confirmed it. Then she added, "And the debt." That word hit the room like a stone. Brandon's face tightened. "That's exaggerated," he said quickly. "No," Rachel replied softly. "It's not." I watched my daughter carefully. This was not the same woman who stood at my dinner table on Christmas Eve. This was someone waking up, painfully, slowly. Brandon took a step forward. Rachel, you're overreacting. No, she said again, stronger this time. I'm finally reacting correctly. Sophie held my hand tighter. Brandon noticed. His gaze shifted between all three of us, and I saw something new in him. Fear. Not emotional fear, practical fear. Loss of control fear. You're making a mistake, he said lower now. Rachel shook her head. The mistake was trusting you completely. A long silence followed. Then Brandon exhaled sharply as if switching strategies again. I can fix this, he said quickly. We just need to handle it privately. No lawyers, no interference. Just us. There it was again. Control through isolation. Rachel actually smiled faintly. That used to work, she said quietly. But it doesn't anymore. Something inside him snapped. You think you can survive this without me, he said sharply. Rachel didn't flinch. I already am. The room went still. Even the air felt different. Brandon looked at me one last time. This isn't over, he said coldly. I nodded slightly. I know. Then he walked out. No dramatic exit, no shouting, just silence and retreat. When the door closed, the house felt lighter. But not peaceful, not yet. Rachel stood in the middle of the room, shaking slightly. Sophie ran to her immediately and hugged her. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Rachel didn't push her away. She held her tightly. I watched them quietly. Then Rachel looked at me. I don't know what comes next, she said honestly. I nodded. That's okay. A pause. Then I added gently, because now at least it's your life again. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't look away from them. She let them fall. And in that moment I understood something important. This wasn't the end of the damage, but it was the end of the denial. And sometimes that is where healing finally begins. The silence after Brandon left didn't feel like peace. It felt like aftermath. Like a storm had finally moved past the house, but the air still carried the weight of everything it destroyed. Rachel stood in the middle of my living room, holding Sophie, both of them, breathing unevenly, as if they were still trying to understand what reality looked like without Brandon shaping it. I noticed something important in that moment. Rachel wasn't just scared anymore. She was present, fully present. For the first time in a long time, I think I need help understanding all of this, she said quietly. Not to me as her mother, but as someone asking for clarity. That mattered. I nodded. We'll go step by step, I said gently. There was no rush anymore, no manipulation, pulling the conversation in different directions, just truth. Sophie sat down on the couch and quietly started drawing again, as if her child's mind had already decided the chaos was over. Rachel watched her for a moment before sitting down across from me. I met with Claire again, she repeated softly. She explained the trust funds and the protections and what Brandon was doing financially. She paused, then added, I feel like I've been living in a story someone else wrote for me. That sentence stayed in the air longer than anything else, because it was accurate. Brandon hadn't just influenced decisions, he had shaped perception. And perception once distorted long enough becomes reality to the person living inside it. I don't know how to fix what I did to you, Rachel said suddenly, her voice cracking. I studied her carefully. This was the moment she expected forgiveness, or rejection, or instruction. But I didn't give her any of those immediately. Instead, I asked quietly, What do you think you did? That question made her flinch slightly, because it forced her to define it, not escape it. Rachel looked down. I humiliated you, she said. I let you be treated like you didn't matter. I repeated things I was told without questioning them, and I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as inconvenient. Her voice broke at the last word. Sophie looked up briefly, sensing the shift in emotion, then returned to her drawing. I took a slow breath. That's part of it, I said gently. Rachel looked up quickly. Part of it, I nodded, but not all of it. She frowned slightly. I continued. You didn't just hurt me, Rachel. You allowed yourself to be placed in a system where your judgment was slowly replaced by someone else's agenda. She went still. And that I said carefully is why this became dangerous. Silence again. Then Rachel whispered, I didn't recognize myself. That was the truth she had been avoiding. Not just guilt, Identity confusion. Because when manipulation works over time, you don't notice the moment you stop thinking independently. You only notice when you finally try to think again. Rachel exhaled shakily. I don't want to be like that again. I know, I said. And I don't want Sophie growing up thinking love means control. That line changed something in the room. Not dramatically, but deeply. I could see it in her posture, in the way she looked at her daughter, in the way she finally stopped defending the past. Outside, snow began falling again, soft, quiet, like the world itself was resetting slowly. Rachel leaned forward. So what happens now? That question again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was responsibility. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Now, I said slowly, you rebuild your life without outsourcing your decisions. She nodded. No argument. That alone was significant. And Brandon, she asked quietly. I paused. I think you already know that answer. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. I don't want him in our lives, she said firmly. Not angry, not emotional, just final. That surprised me, because I expected hesitation. But sometimes clarity arrives after collapse, not before it. Sophie suddenly ran over, holding her drawing. It's us, she said proudly. Rachel looked down. 3 figures again, but this time the middle one wasn't connected to anything unstable. It was simply there, balanced, present. Rachel smiled faintly through tears. I want that, she whispered. I nodded. Then you start building it, not instantly, not perfectly, but intentionally. That night, after Rachel and Sophie fell asleep in the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet in a different way now. Not empty, not heavy, just still. I thought about everything that had happened since Christmas Eve. The humiliation, the silence, the legal chaos, the confrontation, and finally, the truth. Not a perfect truth, not a comfortable one, but a necessary one. My phone sat on the table. No new messages from Brandon. And for the first time, that didn't feel like tension. It felt like distance. Healthy distance. Claire had been right about something important. Protecting yourself doesn't destroy love, it clarifies it. The next morning, Rachel came into the kitchen early. No makeup, hair tied back loosely, simple clothes. No performance, just her. I'm going to stay for a while, she said. I looked at her. Not as a child, she added quickly, as someone rebuilding. I nodded slowly. That's fine. A pause. Then she said, I want to learn how to do things differently. I believed her, not because she was perfect, but because she was finally aware, and awareness is the first real step toward change. Sophie came running in moments later, full of energy, asking about pancakes. Rachel laughed softly. Let's make them together, she said. And something small but important shifted in that kitchen. Not healing, not closure, but participation, real participation. Later that week, Claire called one last time before the new year. It looks like Brandon has stopped attempting direct contact, she said. Stopped, I asked. For now, she clarified. Financial pressure is catching up with him. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. That chapter was no longer mine to manage. After the call, I stood by the window watching snow fall over the quiet Ohio neighborhood. Rachel was outside with Sophie building a crooked snowman that leaned slightly to one side. They were laughing. Not the forced kind. Real laughter. I watched them for a long time, and I realized something I hadn't understood before. Revenge had never been the point. Survival was. But healing was something else entirely. It required presence, boundaries, truth, and time. As I stood there, Rachel looked up at the window and caught my eye. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gave a small nod. Not apology, not request, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. And in that quiet exchange, something unspoken settled between us. We were not who we had been, but we were no longer lost either. Outside, Sophie shouted happily as the snowman's head tilted and fell again. And Rachel laughed this time without fear in her voice. I turned away from the window slowly, not because the story was over, but because for the first time, it was finally continuing in the right direction. This story is not really about revenge. It is about something quieter and much harder to see until you are already standing in the middle of it. It is about the moment a mother realizes that love alone is not enough when it is not respected. Gina spent years believing that sacrifice would naturally turn into gratitude, that giving everything she had would eventually protect her place in her daughter's heart. But what she learned instead was uncomfortable. When love is given without boundaries, it can slowly be mistaken for obligation. And once that happens, even the kindest hearts can start to take it for granted without realizing how deeply it hurts the person giving it. Rachel's journey is just as important. She did not wake up one day and become cruel. She was slowly pulled into a version of life where success, money, and control were disguised as stability. She confused dependence with partnership and silence with peace. Only when everything collapsed did she begin to see how much of her thinking had not truly been her own. But the most powerful truth in this story is not the betrayal. It is the possibility of change. Because even after humiliation, even after legal battles, even after emotional damage that cannot be undone, something new can still begin when honesty finally enters the room. Gina did not win by destroying anyone. She won by refusing to disappear. And Rachel did not heal by being forgiven instantly. She began healing the moment she stopped defending what was hurting her and started facing the truth, however painful it was. Sometimes the most important transformation in a family is not reconciliation, it is clarity. Clear boundaries, clear responsibility, clear truth without manipulation. And from that clarity, something fragile but real can finally grow again. Not the old relationship, but a new one built on awareness instead of illusion. If this story touched you in any way, I would really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment where love alone was not enough and boundaries had to take its place? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional, real-life family drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue creating stories that explore love loss, truth, and healing in the most human way possible.